The world wants our kids to swallow its messages whole, but we want discerning, thinking children. So today's guest, Chantal Howard, will explain teaching our kids to think through the art of asking questions.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. I'm Lisa Mladinich, and today Chantal Howard is here to explain teaching our kids to think through the art of asking questions. Such a great topic, especially for our times. Chantal Howard is a certified master strategist and the director of the Wholeness Coaching School. As a successful entrepreneur, certified health coach, and mindset coach, Chantal has helped hundreds of men and women up-level their well-being, businesses, and relationships. Her leadership experience spans 10 years of faith-based ministry development, high-level sales performance, and training business leaders. Additionally, she is an active doTERRA wellness advocate and the creator of Aroma Rosary. Check out aromarosary.com. Do not miss this, especially before Christmas. They're just beautiful. Okay, Chantal is married to Dr. Peter Howard, STD, who is the founder of the Fulton Sheen Institute. As a homeschooling mother of 6 children, Chantal's divine purpose is to raise up the next generation of leaders who know how to dream, design, and discipline their lives into the greatness of their own callings. Chantal lives with her family in Sandpoint, Idaho, where they enjoy together a simple life surrounded by the beauty of the lakes, the mountains, and a wholesome community. You can find her at chantal-howard.com. That's in the show notes, along with aromarosary.com. Chantal, it's been a little while, but it is so good to see you again.
Oh, thank you so much. It is a joy to be back. Our hearts have been knit together for so long. It doesn't even feel like there was a lack or a gap in there because I know we just share so much in common. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. It's always a joy. And I'm always so refreshed. I always feel kind of like reading a good book when I talk with you. You bring such good and fresh ways of thinking. And I really always appreciate that. I always keep thinking after I have a conversation with you. So I hope everyone listening is going to have that same feeling. Yeah, we're talking about teaching through kind of cultivating this questioning process in our kids. Say a little bit about why you're excited about this approach.
Absolutely. Well, I do think at the heart of raising our children up to be leaders, it's helping them to have that ability to think. And I'll never forget the great Andrew Pudewa, who I was privileged to learn from even as a young person. He would say, I remember I was in a lecture once and he said, "What does it mean to think?" And I thought, I don't know. I don't know what it means to think. And that was when he really enlightened me. He said, "Look, it's asking yourself questions." And that stuck with me so profoundly because I realized that the world, as you mentioned in the intro, they don't really want us asking questions, right? Within a world where propaganda and slogans and other people's ideas mimicking and parroting and just pushing information out there is the norm. And when you question critically, there's oftentimes we get ostracized. And I think that that's true for our young people especially. And so we need to learn to equip them by, first of all, knowing the process ourselves. And that's been one of the most important pieces for me in raising my children is realizing, ooh, I got to look in the mirror first. I need to understand this process. Do I know how to ask myself critical questions? Do I have an accurate thinking process that I actually can engage? And do I give them permission to think, or do I just want them to regurgitate what I say and to do what I say and so forth and so on. So this is really near and dear to me because I have been through the gamut now, raising my kids. I've got one who's 19 and one who's 2 and all in the middle there. And I'm spanning all those gaps right now. I feel sometimes I tease, but I feel a little bit like a schizophrenic parent. I'm like 19, grandbaby, out of the house, all the way down to, just one I just finished weaning. And so there's a lot of scope in this in terms of asking questions. You're going to ask questions very differently to your older children than you would your younger ones. But nonetheless, it's at the heart of what it means, I think, to be a parent that can hold the water today of the weight of the world that we are asked to bear.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so true. And you say it so beautifully. It's very inviting to think about having an approach that inoculates our kids from just having their brain sort of hijacked. What is the process for you as a parent for being in the mindset of asking questions and not just resorting to, here, parrot what I think, parrot what I say?
Right. Yeah. Well, I love Alfred North Whitehead. He said, the purpose of thinking is to let ideas die instead of us dying. And I think that this is really kind of the fundamental idea of the thought process, right? Is that we get to try on and we get to actually explore the consequences of our actions before we engage. And as parents, we need to exercise this first as well, right? A lot of times we tend to lean towards, well, we'll lecture or we'll demand or we'll have kind of expectations of our children. And we often don't stop long enough to think, is this the right approach? Where is this going to play out? Is this going to elicit the response I want from my children? I want to win their hearts, not just their obedience. I want their obedience too, but I want them to actually thrive. And is my approach going to result in that? So these are the types of questions that we fundamentally need to learn how to ask ourselves so that when we sit down with our teenagers, we can actually begin to go through the process of what I would consider a true hypothesis, right? We start with a question, we play that out. And I like the idea that questions really are the antecedent to action, right? They're the predecessor. We do not want ourselves or our children moving into action without thoughtfulness. So I think, again, that's why I love this process of helping parents develop the art of asking questions and teaching that to their children.
A few things are just popcorning in my brain. And one is that for anyone listening that might be scratching your head, Chantal, and you can address this is not about abdicating authority as a parent. You said, I want my children's obedience, and that's a God-given gift. It's more along the lines of something Socratic, something that's agile and has the kind of authentic God-ordered freedom that we want for our children. Would you just address that and then start to show us what it looks like?
Absolutely. This is ancient wisdom. This is not us trying to move into a space of perhaps, like you said, abdicating authority. If anything, this is the way in which God often presents his own wisdom in provoking us into truth, right? After all, the fundamental question, seek and you shall find, ask and you shall receive, that means that we have to learn to ask rightly. And even in scripture, that's noted that we often do not ask rightly. Therefore, we receive what we're not looking for. And we often have to learn the hard way. So another gentleman who I've often leaned into, his name is Sam Kern, and he says, to be on a quest is nothing more or less than to become an asker of questions.
Ooh, I love
we
that.
are ultimately on this journey towards heaven. And while the path is outlined and we have this beautiful, rich tradition, each one of us is asked to engage our own free will and to come to the truth. And so we cannot presume that our children are just going to, pick it up by osmosis entirely, or that we're going to lecture it and they're just going to receive it. We have to provoke that longing and that desire and that quest and help them realize that this is an adventure that they have to climb ultimately. And I love the idea of a climb, right? At every intersection, every point along the journey. I grew up in Colorado, so I just have this very vivid imagery of being, climbing a peak. And I'll never forget, especially one time when my brother and I was 14, he was 18. I trusted him just indefinitely. It was like, oh, if he says we can do it, we can do it. And we headed out on one of the most technical peaks in Colorado. And inevitably, you start to ask questions. Which way? Is it this way? Is it that way? How do we navigate this? Should we go up this draw? Well, should we cross the stream here? Do we need to rope up and climb this, this steep pitch? Is this a good place? You begin to ask questions to help you get to your destination. And if we ask those questions, or if we don't ask those questions, we end up putting ourselves in harm's way. And I'll never forget this peak, because we got to a point where we did find ourselves against a really big, steep wall. And it was clearly beyond the scope of what we'd prepared for. We really needed rock climbing gear in order to do it. And in his naive, youthful, perhaps not as, developed judgment, he's like, oh, we'll be fine. Let's just do it anyway. And he said, you go first. Right. And I'm like, okay, I'll just go first. I'll just do it. And he roped me up a little bit, but not substantially. And I climbed this pitch. And I remember thinking, gosh, one slip, I'm definitely dead. This is a 500-foot drop to my left. I am not coming back. And I got up to the top, and it had started to snow up at the top. So the rock was slick. There was all kinds of variables in play.
Whoa.
I kind of sat there and I anchored myself in, and I watched him climb up, and the sheer terror and look on his face of like, oh my gosh, what have we done? And why did I just risk the life of my little sister? It made such an impression on me, and it made me think about this topic, because we have to ask the questions first. Otherwise, we get ourselves into moral conundrums. We get ourselves into risky places. And if we can develop this skill in our children, then we truly are giving them life-altering and life-saving tools. And that's, I think, questions, as simple as it is, it's something we often don't think about.
Yeah. And the thing is, in our culture, and in some ways it's been a benefit to us culturally, we think about being risk takers and being bold, and that's all good. We want to be appropriate and wise in the way that we choose to do that. But this idea of being in the question, which you and I as coaches spend a lot of our lives doing, in that place where we trust the Holy Spirit to lead and to open up something that has been not seen or not clear before. But it requires vulnerability. It requires humility to stand in the question and stay with the question instead of leaping ahead to try to get the right answer. And I feel like that's a whole other branch of this tree where we get our kids out of that people-pleasing place of having the right answer rather than really thinking.
Oh, boy. That just resonates so strongly. And I'm sure for those of you that are listening that have ventured into the realm of homeschooling at any depth, you realize what a different model it is to build education around the pursuit versus just the multiple choice, right? And that's really that humble inquiry that you alluded to, that is really the premise of what we seek to create education around is, yes, imitation of great books. Yes, imitation of great literature, great art. We want to have exposure to excellence. We want to have exposure. And obviously, when it comes to the mathematical sciences, we can't just become totally, relativist around it. Right? We can't just make up our own answers. But nonetheless, I think what's at the heart of this, especially as we enter into it rightly understood, is as parents, we have a fundamental belief that our children have a worth and a dignity and a capacity knit into their very nature that if we, like you said, sit in the question, we will see the truth emerge. Does that mean we don't fail? Does it mean that they won't often choose the right direction? Of course, that's the risk. That is the risk. And we have to do, again, we need parameters. We need boundaries. We need guidance. I'm not suggesting that, again, that we parent from a place of a lack of judgment. But there are many times where this is the appropriate path to really eliciting a love of learning and a love of the truth, because it comes ultimately from within. And I think that is, if I can say anything about my own childhood, which was really blessed. I was homeschooled from 4th grade all the way through high school. My mother had a very strong conversion. She wanted us to just fall in love radically with our faith. And she did so by being a beautiful example and asking us questions that would help us to realize the journey she'd been on and want to imitate that rather than, it wasn't forced. And for that, I'm very grateful.
Mm. Yeah, that's just so inspiring. So what is the first step when you start to introduce, how are we helping our kids learn to think is the overarching question. Where do we begin?
This is so good. Yeah. So I think this remaining curious, which again is something that has to be tempered and guarded, because curiosity has often been portrayed as perhaps a place of danger, or using our imagination as a place of bridled restraint, where we could end up wandering into places we oughtn't. But ultimately, our curiosity and our imagination are gifts from God, and we need to teach and develop them healthfully within our kids. Otherwise, they're left to ultimately be captured by the enemy, and the enemy will use those all day long, right? So he will take charge of our kids' imagination. And so if we teach them to remain curious, to really begin to decipher between what's fact and what's fabricated, this is where we can begin to help them see the truth. So an attitude of curiosity, I think, is really important. But then we also have an attitude of responsibility, helping our kids to realize that when you engage in this thinking process, and you choose to let your actions follow that process, you have to own it. You have to take responsibility for your actions. And by teaching them to ask those critical questions, we actually give them we connect the dots between their behavior, their emotional life, and the actions that they ultimately choose to take. So, Tony Robbins, who is a great life coach, and many people enjoy receiving some of his inspiration. He's not Catholic, and he doesn't have the fullness, but he often gives really insightful things. And he says successful people ask better questions, and as a result, they get better answers. So I think at the heart of this, we need to first of all be aware that we can be directive, and we can have questions that are perhaps oriented or pushing. And just learning, what are we doing? What are we saying? We can change a conversation with a question. We can change the tone of a relationship, what's happening within the family dynamic with a question. And we can really challenge our children here. And I think that's probably one of the things that really gets me most excited. So for example, I'm trying to think, I want to think of a good example here that would be relevant to our topic. Instead of, I want to prove a point, right? Like, why do bad things always happen to me? Our kids can come to, why do I always get the short end? Why do my brother and sister, right? We can pivot that and help them to learn to ask the question, what am I needing to learn right now? Right? What is there in this that I can actually glean from? And that's a mature question. That's a question that requires another level versus this pouty, self-absorbed, why. And why is an interesting question, isn't it? Why often insinuates a motive or something underneath it. And I often encourage parents to shift away from saying, why did you do that? Why didn't you help your sister? Why can't you get it right? Right? It's often an accusatory question, and it comes with some weight. We need to be careful with why. And instead, I would encourage what and how questions as a great place to start, because they're much more curious and they leave a lot more room for the freedom of a young person, especially to begin to ponder the consequences of what they get to choose here.
Yeah. And we're just about to take a short break to hear from our sponsor. But I'd like to step into the awareness, too, that as we're teaching our children to ask questions, we want to also be humble and vulnerable ourselves about not pushing for a specific answer. In order to teach this, we sort of need to let them off the leash in terms of their ability to roam and consider and allow their brains to light up in that neurological way that they do when we ask questions. But we are going to take just a few seconds to hear from our sponsor, and we will be right back.
Hi, I'm Walter Crawford.
And I'm Maureen Whitman.
We are the co-founders of homeschoolconnections.com and proud sponsors of the Homeschooling Saints podcast,
which is here to help you homeschool more joyfully, more easily, and more effectively.
We want to thank you for listening.
And we invite you to check out our courses at homeschoolconnections.com.
And now back to our program.
All right, we're back with Chantal Howard, and we are talking about teaching our kids to think through asking questions, and this is just so much fun. Any examples or fruits that you're seeing bubbling to the surface in your own family's development, Chantal?
Absolutely. So again, this is an age-appropriate discretion, right? I think we need to realize that certain kids can handle deeper questions than others. But fundamentally, at 2 years old, we often present questions of this or that, right? This or that. Would you like this or would you like that? Oh, I can engage my freedom. That takes it away from being directive. Go to your bed. Well, wait, would you like to read a book or would you like to, lay down by yourself, right? It's just that directive. And again, creating space for them to engage in choosing. At a little bit older age, I think about, 6, 7, 8 years old, where they really do have how questions and some of those why questions begin to surface. And we get to provide the opportunity, how do I spell this word? Right? Tell me how to spell this word. Okay, well, what do you think? There's no wrong answer. Let's explore it. Go for it. Take a stab at it. Right? Being willing to let them fail in these environments is so important because then they actually realize that they have the freedom to pick up, to try again, and to move forward. There's so many lessons in giving those safe environment places for them to fail and know that we aren't going to crush them for it. So I love that in that younger age when they can play safely, so to speak, with failure. As they get a little bit older into those teen years, and I'm thinking I have now my 14-year-old, and boy, oh man, is she at a point where she's just so sure, right? She's so sure she knows. And it's kind of cute because a lot of times I'll ask those open-ended questions, such as, well, what do you think would be the right choice for you right now? Oh, why are you life coaching me? And it's so fun. But I see that she's starting to think through the process. Simple things like we had I needed one of my kids to actually call the dentist to arrange something regarding their dentist appointment. And I was busy. I don't want to do that. What do you think is going to happen? Right? What's the worst that could happen? Well, I could be embarrassed. These questions that just, again, give them a chance to realize that they have a capacity that the world doesn't want them to know they have. So questions, I think, really allow our children to begin to regulate and learn how to regulate their emotional life. And that to me is one of the most important pieces, because when we help them understand what they're thinking, they can begin to identify what they're feeling. And we know that those feelings are ultimately going to be the largest driver in their decision-making process.
Yeah. And I know that you work with people who are entering into new seasons or coping with new challenges, things like that. A lot of what we learn as coaches is stepping into what's possible in the aftermath of a big disappointment. I feel like that's a great place, too, to stand with our kids. All right, well, it's raining. You don't get to play your game. What's possible now that we're indoors in the rain? What else is there? It's like that agile sense of we can always ask a question that opens up a possibility. And kids, given the opportunity, can do that. I also thought too, when you were saying about how to spell a word, like the younger kid who's still figuring out what words are to them, and they're still in that kind of nebulous, don't have to have everything perfect, exploratory space, might just take a stab at it. Whereas an older kid who's in that phase where everything has to be the right answer might just go, oh, Mom, and go look it up for themselves. Right?
Yeah.
Like you and not always feeding them the answer. Right? Yes.
Exactly.
Right. You can see how just taking a question approach can kind of inspire action and inspire initiative as well.
Yes, that's really true. So I often think about, and again, translating some of the things that we do within a space of working with adults, but how does this relate to us? So first of all, I think learning to ask questions for ourselves and of ourselves, being more demanding at a personal level and playing that out, literally scenarioizing, dreaming, engaging. And again, I do think that there's been a lot of us and I speak for my generation and in this faith space where the imagination and the dream process has been kind of crushed. We really have shut that down. And I really think that that's something for us to rediscover within the scope of orthodoxy, within the scope of moral boundaries, of course. But like you said, what is possible? And can I ask myself, what would the outcome be if I actually shifted my parenting on this topic? We get so bullheaded and so sure, right, that we've got to do it this way because my parents did it that way, or because I've heard somebody say it needs to be that way. What if? I love that as a question. And then as we engage in these conversations with especially our teenagers, where these questions become more pivotal, one at a time. I think that's an important piece, is to not bombard with so many questions or so many statements, or moving in. We can fall prey right back into that lecture mode, right? Where we just have directive and we're trying to push them. So I just think that's another component that is really helpful, is to learn to ask one at a time, to listen, and to affirm their efforts to try to come up with something. Because again, we can have in our mind what we think it needs to be and become dissatisfied. But the more that I've allowed my kids room to breathe, the more I'm honestly genuinely impressed with what they have baked right into their own innate ability to ponder and to conclude.
Yeah. And I would say too, anyone who's a little nervous about trying something new or thinking differently about how they relate to their kids, you might just go through a period of just noticing your own internal questions. Like sometimes we squelch them or we bypass them quickly because they don't seem to fit the mold of the way we've been brought up to think. But you might be having random thoughts or areas of curiosity. I don't know, maybe you're looking at a picture and thinking, what would my life have been like if I had been different in this way? Or if we hadn't moved to that new place, or if I had never met my best friend. Like even just playing questions with yourself, as you were saying, not necessarily the big or the deep or the life-changing questions, but as you said, igniting that ability to dream. What if? I love that question.
For sure. And then we can test our conclusions too, right? We get into the process and we actually do begin to explore, is the outcome that I'm creating through this thought process good, beneficial, beautiful, helpful? Does this serve the end that I'm trying? If not, what needs to shift? And I do think a lot of times these questions are very simple. When we talk with our kids, just simply the question, what's on your mind? What are you thinking? I'd love to explore that with you. I think oftentimes, what's the real challenge here? What's the real problem? Can we discover it? Can we even identify what the problem is? Because oftentimes those problems or those challenges emotionally, especially, are great big stories that we make up that aren't really real. And sometimes we just need to be able to bring them to light and poke a little hole in it, and right, all the drama can dissipate. How can I help you explore this? What would be helpful? What do you think needs to happen? What do you want? What is it you want? That's a really good question. What don't you want? What are you tired of? Why do you think this isn't working? Right? We can get really curious again and let them explore. And when we sit in that question, like you said, I really do think that we're able to elicit a whole new level of discovery and innovation. And to be totally honest, that's where I feel like sanctity, wholeness, and even the driving force behind the church's greatness really comes from. We are not a people who are oriented to just receiving what somebody else has thought. We want to press in. Yes, absorb the great thinkers, but then ask, what else? Right? That's why we have 2,000 years of incredible, expansive, and expanding wisdom, because we've stayed curious and we've stayed in the pursuit of the truth.
Oh, yeah, that's so inspiring, Chantal. Almost could end there, but I want to give you the opportunity just to step us into anything else that's still there. What other pieces or final thoughts would you like to leave us with?
Well, I really do think that this journey with our children is one that we are continually discovering how to do better. And I think many people are probably going, well, I haven't done that, or I over lecture, or maybe it's my husband who does that, right? It's always easier to point out somebody else's flaws. And I think fundamentally at the heart of this is a willingness that says failure is part of the process. And this progression, not perfectionism, is really an important message for our kids, so that we really can help, I think, unwind some of that tension and anxiety that is surfacing. And within the space of Catholic homeschooling families in particular, we're really seeing a lot of, I have to get it right or else, right? I need to be the exceptional moral kid who just never makes the mistake. And I think that we do a disservice to our kids if that's really where we leave them, because inevitably we're all human. And again, I'm not advocating that we give them a relativistic basis for their life. If anything, teaching them the art of good questions is going to provoke them to actually answering the truth. I think I don't know if it's G.K. Chesterton or Sheen or what, but it's like in the end, our mouths are made to open ultimately to close upon something solid. But we have to teach our children to expand the possibility so that they can latch down on truth. And today, when ideologies and self-image and so much is being just pushed on them, we have to teach them how to ask the questions. Where's the truth? And how do we find it? So I think it's just an incredible perspective shift. And if anything else, I hope that's what we've kind of done, is just provoked curiosity and perhaps left you with more questions, more questions to go answer on your own.
Well done. All right. Everybody, thank you so much for being with us. Chantal, thank you so much. Always just refreshing to take some time to talk with you and hear what's on your mind. In the midst, everybody, of checking the boxes and making sure they're prepared for next steps, allowing that atmosphere of curiosity. What a blessing that might be, and a great question to take into prayer. Again, thank you, Chantal. You're such a blessing. And everybody, we'll talk to you next time. We'll have Chantal back again soon. And do find her at aromarosary.com and also chantal-howard.com. And that's in the show notes. Connect with Chantal. Boy, she's got a lot to teach me. And you might enjoy learning from her and connecting with her as well. God bless you, everybody. Bye-bye now. And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.